how can you minimize the muscle loss during a fat loss phase? That is a common question, especially among those who have gone through a bulking phase and now are trying to lean out a little bit through, like, say, a fat loss phase. So what are the answers? How can you actually minimize, some of those muscle loss risk factors that might be in place in your situation? Well, that's what today's about. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm Alexa, sports dietitian and nutritionist. Welcome to my channel. Great to have you here. So if you have been trying to gain muscle and you have achieved that successfully, you've gone through, let's say, a bulking phase or some kind of strategic phase where you've trained well, eaten well, and now you've gained the muscle you were hoping for. But now you know that you want to lean out a little bit because inevitably, maybe you've gained some body fat during that phase. Maybe you've gained a little bit more than you were hoping for because either you just took it too long or didn't do it correctly, or doesn't matter why. You just want to get a bit leaner now. However, you've heard about that fact that if you lose weight, you will lose your muscle gains. And you've kind of become fearful around if you could actually lose your gains. Well, first, I want to kind of calm you down a little bit and say, don't stress. It is actually harder to lose muscle than you've been led to believe. Your body will not preferentially get rid of muscle. In fact, you have to do some things pretty poorly on a consistent basis to actually cause that. However, inevitably, depending on how fast you lose weight or want to lose weight or how you go about it, there is some risk of you losing some muscle. So what you want to do is put things in place that can minimize that as much as possible. And what are these things? Well, they're free. Okay, there are 3 things I'm going to share with you today that you can do to enable yourself to at least reduce the risk that the extra muscle losses are going to occur. Let class commence now. So the first 2 are actually the biggest players in this equation. However, the third one will give you a little bit of extra context and something extra to think about just if you are a bit more concerned about losing some muscle. So number 1 is you want to still maintain a high intake of protein. In actual fact, sometimes we'll increase protein during a fat loss phase for the simple fact that you are more at risk of losing muscle during that phase and might become a bit more important than even during a bulking phase in some sense. But the differences aren't huge, don't worry about that. Just understand that you still need to maintain the protein intake. That is one way to attenuate some of that muscle loss that might inevitably occur. Number 2 is maintain your training, maintain that muscular stimulus. Now, no, this is not nutrition related, but still a fact, okay? What you want to do to reduce the muscle loss is not just stop training, okay? Don't just stop lifting weights now that you've gained your muscle and think it's going to be okay. Because what you don't use, you lose. That is true when it comes to muscle. And if you put the fat loss phase in the mix there, well, you're creating an environment that is quite conducive to losing some muscle. So maintain your training, maintain that resistance training. And then number 3 is, like I said, is not as important as these, but is still quite important if you are worried about it. And that is, don't crash diet. Now, don't crash diet regardless. That's a very important factor regardless of nutrition. But just in terms of actual muscle loss, what I'm saying is don't now cut a huge chunk of calories because you will be increasing the risk of your muscle going away. Not all of it, but obviously some. So instead, you want to be a little bit more strategic with your fat loss. Especially if you were doing it alone, this is especially important. Because look, there are ways to do aggressive cuts, and I've done that with some clients in the past and that sort of stuff and done it effectively, but it really is a strategic process. And if you don't know what you're doing, it's very easy to get lost in translation and end up losing more muscle than you were hoping for. So just in general, just avoid any kind of resemblance of a crash diet or severe caloric deficits. Be a little bit more steady and strategic with it, and you'll likely reap better benefits if you are trying to maintain as much of that muscle that you've gained. So there you go, that's the 3 things you can do to reduce the risk of extra muscle loss during a fat loss phase. It's not rocket science, but it's not something you want to stress about. At the end of the day, the muscle you've gained, inevitably, some of it might go down when you are in a deficit, but that is a normal part of the process. It won't be a huge chunk, especially if you're not doing things poorly, but if you are worried, just make sure you're still training, still eating well and eating that protein intake, and make sure you don't go too crazy just for no reason when it comes to your caloric deficit and cutting out those calories. If you've got any questions about this, let me know. Otherwise, leave a comment below. Okay, drop a comment below and let me know what phase are you currently in. Are you trying to gain muscle, gain strength, gain size, or are you currently now in a fat loss phase? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, hit that like button if this video has been helpful, if it's giving you some insightful advice that's going to help you. Give it a like, show it some love. Until next time, stay classy, have a good one, see you later, bye.